All right, well, we have a lot of great content to cover today. So we will, I think, go ahead and get started, even though I see people are still coming in. Uh, but I'm just going to kick off with telling you a little bit about the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network at Generations United. We've been running this TA center now for 4 years, and it is run through a cooperative agreement with the Administration for Community Living. And our mandate is to support systems. So all these systems in that umbrella, community-based organizations, so the professionals who serve the families. So any assistance that you folks need to better serve the families, we are here for you free of charge. And on the next slide, you'll see some of the things that we do, including webinars like this one, individual requests for help. So if you have a question, it can range from I need a resource on so-and-so to will you gather some peers together so I can learn about how to launch this kind of program? Or what's a good policy in child welfare around kin finding? So just all kinds of requests for help. And we do those free of charge. All you have to do is complete that little form there at that link. And then we have a very robust website with lots of resources on it, including the resource that you're going to learn a lot about today during this webinar. Next slide, please. This is just a picture of our website so that you see what the homepage looks like. And that resource library is where this resource is housed. But also you'll see at the very top, we're linking directly to it right now because we think it's such a great resource and are really excited to hear more about it on the next slide from all these fabulous presenters, including our subject matter experts at the American Bar Association Center on Children and the Law, Heidi Redlich-Epstein and Stephen Jessen Howard. And then two practicing attorneys out there who are their models are featured, their programs are featured in the resource that Stephen will be sharing. So Sarah Heaton and Celeste Miller. And I'll let them introduce themselves more as they start to talk. So I will turn it over now to you, Stephen. Thank you. Thank you all.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Heidi Redlich-Epstein, an Associate Director with the ABA Center on Children and Law, and along with my colleague, Stephen Jessen Howard, we work with a group of about 22 attorneys and core staff looking to promote access to justice for children and families. We're a grant-funded sort of nonprofit division of the American Bar Association, working on a whole host of different legal issues, including kinship care, as they intersect with child welfare law. And we are happy to be subject matter experts to the support network. All right, turning it over to Celeste to tell us about her organization.
Hi, everyone. My name's Celeste Miller, and I am from Washington State, and I work at LARC. Well, I'm the supervisor for LARC. So LARC is a legal assistance and referral program for kinship caregivers. It includes fictive kin, so people who are not related to the child can also apply for LARC. It's a statewide program. It's very new, well, 2.5 years old. I still think of it as pretty new. And the work that LARC does is not direct representation. So the kinship caregivers don't receive an attorney to go to court with them. We wish they could, but we started small with a small amount of funding, and we wanted to provide the most service possible across the whole state with that limited funding. So that's why it is more consultation, advice, some brief services in terms of helping with court forms and talking through what to do when the caregiver gets to the court. LARC focuses on minor guardianship, which is the current Washington law that replaced non-parent custody. But it also can help caregivers with other legal issues that are related to their ability to care for the child. In terms of formal, in Washington, we say formal kinship caregivers who are relative placements for a child who's in a dependency. LARC advice is a little more limited because in Washington, those relative placements are not a party to the case. So we do give some advice, and we created a publication about caregivers' rights in those situations. The majority of our clients are informal kinship caregivers that where the child is not in a dependency case with the child welfare agency. And we don't assist people who are not kinship caregivers or fictive kin. So, for example, if a parent called and said, I want to terminate the minor guardianship and have custody of my children returned to me, LARC is not a legal aid program for those potential clients, just kinship caregivers. And it's open for kinship caregivers who live in the state of Washington. And we have actually had some people call who are outside of the state but concerned about a child in the state or hoping to be a placement. And unfortunately, because of our funding, we're limited to helping people who live here. Okay. So I apologize for all the text on the slide, but hopefully it'll be helpful. If you're looking at it later, you can save it. This is just a bunch of data and information about LARC. It is funded by Washington State. We don't have an income eligibility limit, and that is because I worked very closely with the Kinship Care Oversight Committee, which is a statewide group in Washington that really advocates really strongly at the legislature for kinship caregivers. And their input was that, you know, if there was an income limit, there would be so many kinship caregivers who weren't eligible just because they were just a little bit over the cutoff. And even if they were between 200 and 400% of the federal poverty level, it's still very difficult to afford a private attorney, as I'm sure you all know. We've been open since October 2022. We ran some numbers recently because we were advocating for more funding, and we should find out in the next few days. So that's exciting. But since we opened, as of mid-April, we helped 703 kinship caregivers. Our clients are diverse. We help clients from almost the entire state, 34 of the 39 counties. A majority of our clients are between 50 to 70, as you would expect with kinship caregivers, but we do have a range from 18 to 83, which is wild. And we do also have a majority of clients who would be eligible for legal aid anyway, but we do have some that are above that cutoff. Okay. And I was asked to also explain my main position, which is statewide kinship care legal aid coordinator. And this is something that was created in 2019, also through that Kinship Care Oversight Committee. It's funded by the state of Washington. It's one full-time attorney, which is me. So I've been in this position since 2019. And so my job was created before LARC was created. And part of my job is to work together with the Kinship Care Oversight Committee to advocate for that committee's priorities to the legislature. And ever since day one, since I started this job, the priorities, a huge priority was legal support for kinship caregivers. So that's how we advocated together for LARC, and we did receive state funding, which was amazing, and started that up in 2022. So I supervise LARC, but I have other duties as well, including working with other programs across the state to help them create kinship care clinics or other types of legal aid initiatives. I do a lot of trainings for attorneys, and um, I keep my finger on the pulse of everything kinship care because I see that as part of my job. And just to restate what we mentioned at the start, my few slides are just a highlight of one legal aid program for kinship caregivers that is in Washington State. And it's one of the many programs that are talked about in the ABA's and Generations United's excellent resource that talks about a whole bunch of different examples of kinship care legal programs. So I'm just talking about Washington, but there are many others. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Sarah Hedden, managing attorney at Center for Elder Law and Justice. I'm with you today, but I am homesick, so I'll do my best, and I hope you can all understand me okay. So we are a New York state program, but this is national. So I just want to briefly highlight what we do and my credentials so that you know I know what I'm talking about. CELJ, Center for Elder Law and Justice, has been around since 1978, formerly known as Legal Services for the Elderly, Disabled, and Disadvantaged. But keeping up with more appropriate language, we rebranded in 2018 to Center for Elder Law and Justice. We most of our programs work with folks who are 55 and older, but we do have some funding that helps us, allows us to work with folks of all ages, including in Kinship to 18. We, excuse me, I'm sorry. Before I came to CELJ, in my past life, I was a social worker. I have my Juris Doctorate and also my master's in social work. CELJ's kinship program has been around for about 25 years, predating the federal push to keep children with families. And we've noticed, thank you for the feel better, for the wishes in the chat, thank you. It well predated the federal push to keep kids with family, and the federal FFPSA, it's escaping me, but that has really launched our work into, it has helped to move our work forward. So New York has about 62 counties. Less than 10 counties have programs like mine, where attorneys are providing direct representation to kinship caregivers. I did include the definition of kinship caregiver for you, since family law is state specific. In sum, it's anyone who is not a foster parent before they met the child, anyone who had any kind of a relationship before the child needed to come into care. And we work with kinship caregivers of children who are in informal or formal placements, similar to Celeste. Informal, meaning there is not involvement by local authorities like DSS or DCFS. There's no dependency, abuse, neglect. Our formal clients, there is. The child had been removed by the local authorities. Either way, we provide representation as early in the case as possible through the end, with the goal of minimizing trauma and keeping kids with family, keeping the number of placements as low as possible, hopefully one, until they can be returned to their parents. And if they cannot, helping the child and family to have the best plan for permanency that they can, that keeps the birth family involved if possible, and long-term success for the child. Thanks, Stephen.
Okay, now I think we're going to talk kind of like from a big picture. What are some of the legal obstacles that we have heard? And I'm sure most of you all are hearing from the folks that you work with, or if you're a caregiver, you're experiencing sadly yourself. What are some of those legal obstacles that we hear about from kinship families? So the first thing I want to point out is that unlike parents and grandparents and other kin, there's not this automatic legal relationship to the children that you're raising. unlike parents. Parents have this automatic, once the child's born, there's a legal relationship. With any kind of kinship caregiver, there isn't that automatic established legal relationship. And that can cause problems with regard to accessing services later on, getting children enrolled in school, getting the medical care if you're the kinship caregiver and you don't have that formal relationship. And we know that getting that formal relationship, whether it's custody or guardianship or becoming a kinship foster parent, it can take a long time. It can be very costly, especially if you're pursuing it outside the child welfare system. And so we've heard a lot from kinship caregivers who struggle to establish that legal relationship with the child that they're taking care of. And again, that can be a stumbling block as well as others to accessing services and supports for children, which is why it's nice to hear from both Sarah and Celeste that their organization really serves the purpose of helping kin caregivers get access to some of those benefits and services that might not be so easy for them to figure out on their own. And then finally, we like to really acknowledge that families are their own best expert, but they need to make informed decisions about what's best for their family. And in order to make those informed decisions, they oftentimes need an advocate, a lawyer, or somebody who's kind of in their corner to help them figure some of this out. A lot of them are very frustrated with the fact that the system is sort of sets up roadblocks as they go. So I want to turn it over to, I will say, Celeste and Sarah, you can unmute. Any other legal obstacles kind of from a big picture that you see kin caregivers struggling with every day?
Yeah, I can jump in. And I also just noticed a Washington Kinship Navigator put in the chat something I was planning to say. Thank you, Erin. It's a big hurdle for kinship caregivers in Washington specifically is that in the minor guardianship law, if parents object to the petitioner seeking guardianship of the child, the parents, if they are indigent, so if they're low income enough, they have a free court appointed attorney. And kinship caregivers, who are most of the time are the petitioner, the child can also be the petitioner, but generally it's the kinship caregiver. They do not have the right to an attorney. So that's another major reason that LARC was advocated for. And it's just very difficult. The statute is new and it has a lot of requirements. So, it's filing a court case and having a couple of hearings, if not many, and it could take 3 months to a year. It's just very complicated. That's one that is right at the top of my head.
Similar in New York and in Washington, that kinship caregivers do not have a right to counsel. So without a program like ours in most counties in New York, and I imagine in most places across the states, there are not programs to afford attorneys for kinship caregivers. And when kinship caregivers do have the resources to hire an attorney, the attorney often doesn't have the niche knowledge to fully represent them. They do their best. They can do a great job, but having the really specific knowledge is helpful. As far as legal obstacles, one thing that's a huge issue in New York, and I would suspect is also statewide, is hidden foster care. And when families are approached by the local authorities and asked to care for a child who can't be with their parents right now, and when they're told that if they don't take this child right now with no plan and no resources, the alternative is this child's going to go to foster care. And at least in New York, it's not the case. Family would be the first choice, but there is sometimes people might feel coerced or some undue pressure. They're not fully informed and just jump right into taking care of children. And I would as well in that situation, but without having the right knowledge and representation, jump into that and make some mistakes, and people can create their own obstacles by wanting to do well, but setting up their own barriers by wanting to do the right thing, but maybe making the wrong choice by not allowing visitation with another parent when they really should have, and not realizing that what they should be doing. The hidden foster care issue in Delaware as well. Yeah.
Yeah. Sadly, we see it in almost every single state, and as well as forms of kinship diversion, other ways that kin are sort of feeling the squeeze, the pressure to take children without the resources and supports, which kind of leads to some of the bigger obstacles that I think those in the field get to see. But now we're going to hear from Stephen about the different profiles and different types of representation that are going on around the country.
Thanks, Heidi. So yeah, we'll talk more about that recent resource. It was produced by the American Bar Association Center on Children in the Law in collaboration with the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network. And it highlights different legal service models for kin. So there's an overview of different legal service models, which we'll walk through in a minute. And then there's profiles of 9 different programs doing that work. And that includes LARC and CELJ, who you're hearing from today. So this project really started with a survey of kinship navigator programs, and we were interested in hearing more about the legal needs that they were seeing with the kin that they worked with. And what we learned was, one, there was a lot of legal need for kin that was going unmet or only partially met. And then 2, even though we were talking with these kinship navigator programs who themselves are not typically legal organizations or staffed with lawyers, they were connected to a lot of different interesting legal work that was going on to support kin caregivers. So we wanted to learn more about that work and what sort of legal resources are out there for kin, as well as having the opportunity to highlight some of what is already out there and providing those as models that others may be able to take things from or replicate in their states or jurisdictions. So in this report, we divided these legal service models for kin into 3 different models. And I'll caveat that these are sort of broad buckets and we're making some generalizations. Individual programs may do things a little differently or not fall neatly into one of these models. And it's the same with these sort of broad advantages and disadvantages could also vary by the program. But the first is legal education and resources. So these are things like printed materials, websites, videos, or a presentation that would be providing broadly applicable legal information. And this can really range anything from a simple infographic to a really in-depth pro se guide. So we saw a lot of different examples. Almost every program that's profiled in the report does provide some form of legal education or resources to the kin families that they work with. And some of the advantages here are it's easier and cheaper to do the legal resources, right? Once you put in the time to create the materials, you can get them out to a lot of people with pretty little marginal cost or time, and you don't need to be a lawyer in order to, just provide a flyer or send someone a video or something like that. The downside is it's less involved, right? It's harder to provide individualized advice and tailor it to someone's specific situation or to answer any questions that they might have. I think we've seen with increasingly complex and advanced online tools, some of these resources are getting better at sort of responding to people's individualized situations. And maybe with AI, we'll see more of that. But for now, I think it's sort of lacking that in-person and specific component, despite the advantages that come from being able to spread them widely. So Celeste and Sarah, I know you've both helped produce some of these resources and your organization used them. Is there anything you want to add about how these resources can be helpful?
Nothing to add, Stephen.
Yeah, I can say that, when LARC determines our eligibility, we understand that there are some people who would like LARC services but won't be eligible. For example, people who are a placement in a dependency. The amount of advice they would get from us would be probably one discussion over the phone, because they don't have the right, unfortunately, to file documents in a dependency, those different things. So we created a document called Kinship Caregivers and Dependency, What Are Your Rights, and kind of how to advocate for yourself. And we send that out. We send that around to kinship navigators, and we also send them to people who apply to LARC who we won't be able to help that much. We also are just finishing up another publication called Things to Consider When Deciding to File for Minor Guardianship, because there are at times people who maybe the child does not live with them, but they want the child to live with them. The child hasn't lived with them in the past. In our Washington statute, it's not impossible, but it is a little more difficult to do minor guardianship in that situation. So we created a document to really talk about what the legal requirements are and what you have to prove to succeed, so that people in that situation can read that before they decide to apply for LARC or file a case. Because, we have seen some cases that did not succeed because the level of proving that the parents aren't able to parent is pretty high. Um, uh, so, we get requests from people in the community and kinship navigators for these types of publications, and if we try to make them whenever we have time.
Yeah, thanks, Celeste. And I know there are many of you in the chat who maybe do this work and are aware of other good resources, so feel free to share those as well. The next model that we highlight in the report is brief legal services. So here there's some sort of interaction between an individual and a legal professional about their situation, but it's usually limited in time and scope. So we divided this into 3 different categories. There's pop-up clinics. This is where a lawyer or legal volunteers, maybe a law school clinic or organization, are coming to an event or hosting a session, and they're providing legal information or answering questions, maybe helping people one-on-one for a brief amount of time. Then there are courthouse self-help centers. So these are places at a courthouse where people can come and get help filling out paperwork or ask questions before they might have a hearing or have to submit some documentation. And we even heard anecdotes about judges who would be interacting with a kin caregiver and say, let's pause and why don't you go talk to the courthouse self-help center, and they'll help you with this paperwork and help you with the information you need, and then come back and we'll proceed from there. And then legal helplines. So this is where legal advice is being provided over the phone or a software like Zoom or Teams or something like that. So I think the general advantage with all of these programs is that they can be flexible and meet people where they are, right? So pop-up legal clinic, you can, host it at maybe a caregiver support group could bring them in and host a clinic. With the legal helplines, people can call in from almost anywhere. And then the courthouse self-help centers, it's really providing the assistance at the moment in the place where it's most needed. But again, the downside is there's just less opportunity for follow-up and less depth of service. So if questions come up later, it can be harder to ask those. It could be harder for these types of brief legal services to follow someone throughout the whole process of their case. Celeste, I know LARC is primarily a legal helpline. Is there anything you wanted to add about helplines or some of the advantages and disadvantages you see through that model?
Yeah, so it's true, LARC, the legal advice is provided over the phone. There's 2 full-time staff attorneys and 1 part-time legal assistant. And, it's great because Washington is a large state geographically, and we've talked to clients and helped clients from all over the state. It is difficult. The downsides you have listed, sometimes you have a client who really is going to struggle doing technological things. A lot of the courts here now allow appearing by Zoom since the pandemic. And then if there's language barriers, it's difficult. So sometimes we have clients who really, you help them and they are off and running. And then other times we have clients where, if possible, we try to work together maybe with another program that's local, a legal aid, like a volunteer lawyer program that's local, or a kinship navigator and they're all very busy and work really hard, but sometimes they are available to have a meeting with the kinship caregiver in their office and talk with the lawyer and print things and do tech things that the client otherwise wouldn't be able to do. But, I think the dream would be full representation for them all, but we're not there yet.
Right, thank you. And that brings us to our next model, which is legal representation. So this is sort of the classic full legal representation, and it can look a few different ways for kin. How we often see it provided is through a legal aid or not other nonprofit organization or a senior elder law organization. And so these organizations might have a unit that's specifically focused on kin caregivers and legal issues they encounter, or maybe they just have one or two attorneys within a child welfare or family law or senior law unit who can work on these types of cases. Sarah, I know your organization would fall under this model. Is there anything you want to add about some of the advantages or disadvantages of providing full representation through a legal aid and senior law organization?
Sure. The biggest disadvantage is that we can't help everyone. Or these cases last anywhere. 6 months would be really short, and on average, maybe 1 to 2 years, occasionally 4 to 5 years. So we have to be careful with intake that we're not neglecting our current clients and committing malpractice. And it's difficult when you might feel like you've got a month and you're like, I got nothing going on. I can take a lot of new cases. And then the following month, you've got a bunch of trials stacked up. So it can be difficult. There's not a lot of funding out there. My organization, we have very little direct funding for this program. We use our core funding that we could use for other programs, but our board and ED and the organization feel that this work is incredibly important to our clients and our community. So we continue to fund this work. So I listening to Celeste talk in these slides, and so the disadvantage, we go really deep with a couple of cases, and Celeste can provide and programs like hers can provide a lot of services, but not too deep to a lot of people. And what we have sort of piecemeal together in New York, and I imagine a lot of other states, we have this kind of grassroots piecemeal conglomerate of organizations that work together to do our best to meet everyone's needs. And we're not meeting them all, but we do our best. So we've got our kinship navigators, and they're on the phone only. They are the ones that house all of the materials that you mentioned 2 slides ago. And they have a hotline folks can call with questions, and it's usually 1 to 2 interactions. There's family legal care out of New York City. They recently, I think in the last year or two, expanded statewide. So when we get someone at our agency that has not filed a petition yet, we don't have the bandwidth always to draft a good petition for them. We'll send them to family legal care to piecemeal it. They work with them, they have a meeting, they draft this great petition, get it filed, and they call us again months later when they finally have a court date, and we can help them out. We do somewhat of triage when folks call us, so we don't always take cases when they come in, as in, someone has a court date next week, but someone else doesn't have court till next month. We may take the month out one because they might have urgent needs, that maybe there's some things happening that they need help with outside of court that could lead to a disruption in placement. And we can get involved now, talk to our other community partners and stakeholders, and try to keep these kids with that kin until they can be with their family.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I think that speaks to a lot of the sort of trade-offs between depth of services and ability to reach more people. And so it's good that you are able to work with partnerships to sort of reach as many people as you can. And we'll talk about that more when we get to some of the broader tips from the report. The other model of legal representation I want to highlight here is private representation. So the advantage there is you don't have the same sort of restrictions on eligibility that might come up with income eligibility or other sort of restrictions for legal aid or other organizations like that. Of course, the downside is that can be very expensive to caregivers, and it can also be more difficult to find a private attorney who has the sort of representation or the experience and depth of knowledge about kinship issues, as well as having those relationships with other organizations who may be able to assist the kin caregiver in the same way that like a legal aid or senior law organization is probably plugged into some of those services that can be offered to support kin caregivers, and also often houses units like a housing unit or employment unit that may be able to help the kin caregiver with any other legal issues they may be experiencing. Okay, the next model of legal representation that we wanted to highlight is tribal representation and representation in tribal courts. So to help us learn more about that, I want to bring in Pearl Pickett, who is an attorney with the Alaska Legal Services Corporation, which is one of the programs that is highlighted in this report. So Pearl, we'd love to hear a little bit more about your work and any insights you can offer about legal assistance in tribal courts or working with tribal organizations.
Sure. Thanks for asking. So in our role we have at Alaska Legal Services, I'm part of a unit that represents pretty much exclusively tribes and tribes within child welfare that have intervened in cases in state court. And so our role in that, we view our role pretty expansively. Anything that isn't prohibited is ethically is something that we consider something that we can help with and is within our domain. And so one of the key areas that we try to prioritize is being that advocate who can bridge the gap between unrepresented relatives seeking placement and a role in children's lives when they're in state custody and the court system, because we know and see that without actual legal assistance, relatives aren't licensed, they don't get placement. Any number of other sort of negative consequences occur without an attorney helping guide you through. And so we try to view our role expansively. And in fairness, there are plenty of other folks in the child welfare community that do the same. It's just that because we get to shift gears a little bit more frequently in terms of where the tribes alliances might lie, and because of our role as advocates for tribes pursuing their rights and pursuing the protections of ICWA, we have a greater special interest in ensuring placement with kin and ensuring that kin placements are adequately supported. So the other part of our work is both within my unit and within the rest of Alaska Legal Services is that we try to prioritize assistance to caregivers. And what that can mean, especially in a state like Alaska with a large Alaska Native population, is that we consider what our options are in terms of tribal court and try to pursue options through tribal court, which can be more culturally responsive, less onerous potentially for caregivers, right? So if you take in Alaska, if you have a guardianship, a minor guardianship, you will be required to provide an annual report. If you try to delegate parental authority, you'll need to re-up it once a year. But if you find a solution within tribal courts under tribal law and custom, you might be able to have a more durable guardianship under tribal law that doesn't require those same onerous burdens. And what's also true is that you won't be required to work through the protections of ICWA that are meant to stop unnecessary guardianships and unnecessary removals from happening to Native families. So while in state court, guardianship is considered a foster care proceeding under the Indian Child Welfare Act, it's not so. The protections that apply in state court don't apply in tribal court. So there isn't a requirement to produce an expert. There isn't a requirement that the parents get counsel and the caregiver doesn't. It would depend on tribal law and custom and what protections are available there, but it levels the playing field a little bit more because there aren't these additional protections meant to safeguard against unnecessary guardianships and unnecessary removals. And so if cases involve Indian children, we try to use those more expansive options. But that's primarily our work there. And we find that it's really helpful to look to those tribal options for families when they're applicable.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for sharing that, Pearl. That brings us to the organizational profiles that are included in this report. I won't go through all of the programs in the chart, but this chart shows you which programs are profiled in the report and what models they use, so you can check out the ones you're most interested in. And I really encourage you to check out these profiles. There's so much interesting information and good insights from these programs. I really enjoyed speaking to people who work in all these organizations and hearing about all the inspiring and excellent work that they do. I'll share each profile has information about the program that includes an overview of the organization, the needs in the community that their services are responding to, the services that their organization provides, the population that they serve, their staffing, how their kinship work is funded, their outreach and referral process, and then the tips that they have for others who are interested in doing this work. So let's talk more about those tips. And I encourage Celeste, Sarah, and Pearl, if one or two of you want to chime in on each one of these tips and say how this looks in your organization and any advice you have for others seeking to follow them. The first tip that we heard a lot about is the importance of building strong partnerships. So with other service organizations, with courts, with agencies, the importance of partnerships came up time and time again. So I want to open it to any of you who want to talk more about the partnerships your organization has and how that's supported the families that you work with.
Before I became an attorney, I didn't know any attorneys, and I didn't know that how important networking was going to be. When I heard all that in college, I thought, ugh, networking, every time I heard that. But it's so invaluable when I have, when me or any of my staff have an issue with a client or any question, we can just shoot a text message to somebody in administration at the legal department at our local CPS or DSS, TCF, and in both counties that we work in, with the private bar, with the judges. I'm not texting judges. Just saying that we have really great relationships, and we're able to get information a lot quicker now than, say, I started in 2016 when we were only in one county, and it took a lot to get into the second county that we're in now. Building those relationships was very difficult, and seeing how my work was then versus now, how quickly I can get information now than as opposed to then. In my reputation, I built a good reputation, and that's so key and important, particularly with family law and kinship law, but everywhere. Just when you're really advocating for a client, when I'm advocating for a client, my colleagues know that, if I have strong arguments and strong opinions about a client, they know that they can trust me and they can trust my take and opinion on that client. And those relationships they're huge, and they will pay off in tenfold with your clients.
Yeah, I can jump in also about this one. I think so. Lark has strong partnerships, and we're in a unique situation because we're new and we were created in partnership with some of these programs. So I feel very lucky about that. But the Kinship Navigator program through DSHS ALTSA, there's navigators all around the state that work with kinship caregivers who are not involved in the child welfare system, or the children with them aren't in dependencies. So we have we get direct referrals from the navigators. So that's great. We also work on relationships with volunteer lawyer programs around the state. So if one of them has a kinship care clinic and someone's calling us from that county, we can say, oh, you can go to this clinic. That's once a month. Or, another one, we work together with them to, they will access court records in their county for us. So we don't have to pay the high fee to get that county's online records access. And that reminded me of, when Sarah was talking about just having those partnerships helps you with all the different parts of helping the client. If you can't do it, maybe one of your partners can do that piece of it.
Definitely. Thank you. The next one is the importance of including kin in program design, ensuring that those services are accessible to kin and responsive to their needs. Do any of you want to share about how you've done that with your program?
I can speak to this too, again, since it's a relatively new program, and the group that advocated for it was um, a large statewide group of kinship caregivers and kinship care advocates. Uh, from the beginning, there was a lot of input on, what would be the most useful and the most helpful for kinship caregivers in the legal program. So we started off with that, which is just really great. And with those partnerships with, say, the kinship navigators, the LARC team can at time, occasionally send even kind of informal polls. So for example, we had because we're new, we also our demand just kept going up and up. And we had the same amount of staff as when we started. So we had to create more strict eligibility priorities for the clients. And we asked via email to the kinship navigators who work closely with caregivers, if they thought it would be better for us to close intake less often, and provide more really short-term services, or continue closing intake when the caseload was full, but provide more in-depth services. So we don't do direct representation, but we do have a range, and the most in-depth is kind of staying with the client through their whole case, doing paperwork with them, helping do some preparation for court. So we can have clients for months, and then we can have other clients who it's 2 phone calls, and then the case is closed for LARC at least. And the vast majority of the feedback we got was that they would rather we continue providing more in-depth help, even if that meant we had to be closed for new clients more often. So that's just an example that I am proud of, that because we're thinking about the different ways that we could make this change, but we wanted to hear from kinship navigators, and they work really closely with kinship caregivers. Some of them are also kinship caregivers themselves.
Yeah, it's great you're able to get that feedback. And also, I think speaks to that first tip, the importance of partnerships, being able to work with the Kinship Navigator programs on that. The next tip is maintaining flexibility in funding sources and finding ways to, reach everyone and expand who can be eligible. We'll talk a little bit more about funding in a minute here. So we'll move on to the next one, which is providing services in multiple languages. Another really important thing, I know Celeste touched on that a bit earlier. Another tip is bringing services to the community. I wonder if Sarah or Pearl, if you could weigh in about how your organization is able to do that and really reach people where they are.
I'll jump in really quickly because you're featuring our staff here on this slide. That's Liam. He used to work in our development program. We are in the community about 400 times a year. Our kinship program does not get out that much. We don't have to drum up clients. There are too many folks who need our help. So we are often not having to do a ton of outreach, but we do. So the outreach we do for our kinship folks doesn't center around us trying to get more clients. It centers on education for the community. I recently gave a presentation to school districts. There's local, somewhat more wealthier school districts that have not seen a lot of kinship placements, or at least have not recognized those kinship placements, and were less educated than more of our big city and less wealthy local districts. And they teamed together and asked us to come in and give a presentation. So what we do typically is some in-services and just more relationship building and education for folks. And beyond that, we have a bunch of programs I had put in our other side, and we do a lot of outreach throughout the year with all of our program priorities. We march in, we'll march in the Pride Parade and on Juneteenth, and we get out there quite a lot.
And I guess for us, I guess it goes back to building strong partnerships. Alaska's giant. And so we try our best to have a presence outside of just sort of urban centers. And so we really value our partnerships with tribes over the years, with tribal nonprofits that know families and serve as, I guess, off ramps to the child welfare system that allow kids to be stabilized with their caregivers, short of state intervention. We also have within Alaska Legal Services more generally the Community Justice Worker Program, which provides training and support to non-attorneys throughout the state so that they can take on issues. And some of those issues we're hoping to expand the capacity of those non-attorney representatives so that we can have a larger footprint without, so many barriers of limited assistance being able to be provided by attorneys with limited funding. So that's, I think it comes down to those partnerships. And I think as well, Alaska's been, as a state, a lot more flexible in terms of the court system being more open to remote participation. The pandemic didn't change much for us apart from adding video. So, but that's it.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. And then the final tip we have here is serving as an important voice in policy change to support kinship families. I know, Celeste, you spoke about how that kind of helped lead to the creation of LARC and additional funding for kinship legal services. I know you've all touched on things that could use change, where there could be additional supports, whether legal or financial or in other ways. And I think these legal programs are often well positioned with the legal expertise and also the direct day-to-day knowledge of working with kinship families about what sort of changes need to be made and how they can sort of bring those to the attention of lawmakers or others empowered to push for those changes. We don't have a ton of time to go into that now, but maybe that's something we could talk about more in the Q&A. And for now, I'll pass it to Heidi, who will share some additional resources with us.
Thank you, Stephen, and Celeste, Sarah, and Pearl for sharing some of your wisdom and trials and tribulations of some of your getting started and getting going for your work. And I am really looking forward to a robust Q&A after this. So some of the resources that are available through the support network is this excellent federal funding primer that came out. It's very dense, but it is really helpful and talks about a lot of different potential funding sources to support attorneys representing kin caregivers. And here are just sort of a few examples. Something I want to highlight that is relatively new is a new federal rule which allows the use of Title IV funding for kinship legal representation. We don't really know about a lot of jurisdictions where we're really jumping in with both feet doing this yet, but we're working on that, and we're here to support that effort. And so if you're a state that really wants to explore that further, please reach out to us because it's something we would like to help see as we go forward. But in the meantime, please look at this primer. It's incredibly helpful. And I think we will talk about funding in a minute during the Q&A. All right. Another great resource, which I know that was put in the chat earlier as well, was how to involve kinship and grandfamilies in programmatic decision-making. If you're setting up organizations, whether it be your Kinship Navigator program or your legal services, making sure that we are including the voice of kin in how we're developing those systems is really important. And this tip sheet is really helpful. Next one. And finally, a very specific piece of information in this resource on legal assistance for Native kinship grandfamilies involved in child welfare, finding an attorney. It is a really focused piece that is incredibly helpful for this population. And then something that Generations United, together with the American Bar Association, the support of KC Family Programs, has on our website, which is grandfamilies.org, is a very lengthy but helpful kinship caregiving options document. It is written from a national perspective, but it really goes through the different options for placement, for permanency, and what some of the sort of benefits and considerations are for kinship caregivers as they're trying to decide, should I become a foster parent? Should I take custody? Should I take guardianship? What is the impact of those decisions? So this is a tool that's really aimed at professionals working with kinship caregivers, but can very easily be read by kinship caregivers themselves to sort of walk them through the thoughts and maybe questions to ask when you're trying to decide what path to go on and which option to pursue. And then these charts, which I think are incredibly helpful when we get these questions all the time. What's a better permanency option for a child exiting care, adoption or guardianship? Generations United worked very closely with all 50 states to create not only a national chart and brief, but a chart for each one of the states that really goes down through rights, responsibilities, legal assistance, benefits, health insurance, and it really does a nice job of drilling down. If you're somebody who's trying to help weigh those permanency options, what are some of the things you really need to consider before making that decision? So I find these charts are really helpful. I'm going to turn it over to Anna.
Thank you so much, Heidi, and everyone, and our bonus special guest, Pearl. You added so many great tips and points of view, so thank you all so much. Please stay connected with us at the Grandfamilies and Kinship Support Network. You can sign up for our monthly newsletter or share this QR code with others. Request any kind of assistance through our short form that's linked on this slide. And please follow us on LinkedIn. We have a very robust LinkedIn page where we share all kinds of kinship information from us and from many, many others. And also, please join us for our conference next month, where Heidi and Stephen and Celeste and a host of others will be. We have over 40 workshops on kinship, a pre-conference intensive on kinship. It's going to be the most robust kinship conference in well over a decade, when CWLA had their fabulous one in New Orleans. So please join us for that. And then Mari's going to drop in the chat that Q&A link. So basically, we're going to come off the webinar and we're going to go into a Zoom meeting where people can come off onto microphones, onto cameras, and ask their questions directly of the panelists. So we will drop that link in the chat, and we hope to see you over there in that Zoom meeting. Here is everyone's contact information except for Pearl's, but if you reach out to any one of us, we can get you Pearl's as well. So, or maybe she can drop it in the chat. At any rate, thank you all so much.